Northern Ireland's troubles were marked by bombings, bloodshed, and an unlikely foreign benefactor, Muammar Gaddafi. From his seat of power in Libya, Gaddafi armed the Irish Republican Army in a secretive alliance that would shake the very foundations of British rule. But why did this distant dictator care about the conflict in Northern Ireland? And how did Libyan arms turn the IRA into one of Europe's most dangerous insurgent forces? Today, we explore the hidden story behind Gaddafi's deadly support for the IRA. To understand Gaddafi's involvement in Northern Ireland, we need to go back and look at the deep history of British-Irish relations. The relationship between Britain and Ireland has been fraught for centuries, with Ireland struggling for self-determination under British rule. The seeds of Irish nationalist resistance were sown as far back as the 1600s, when British colonisation brought Protestant settlers to Ireland, especially in the north, creating lasting religious and political divisions. These settlers were largely loyal to the British Crown, while the native Irish population, particularly in the south and west, remained overwhelmingly Catholic and resistant to foreign rule. Tensions simmered for centuries, leading to violent uprisings and repeated suppression by British forces. These divisions were exacerbated by the Great Irish Famine of the 1840s, when more than 1 million Irish people died of starvation, and another million fled the country, many to the United States. British policies were widely blamed for worsening the famine, and the bitterness it caused planted the seeds of Irish nationalist movements that would grow stronger in the following decades. By the late 19th century, Irish leaders such as Charles Stewart Parnell began demanding Home Rule, a movement that would lead to the eventual creation of the Irish Free State in 1921. But this victory was bittersweet. The partition of Ireland left 6 northern counties, where Protestants were the majority, as part of the United Kingdom. This partition, cemented in the Government of Ireland Act 1920, created Northern Ireland, and its Catholic minority faced decades of discrimination in voting, housing and employment. It was here in these communities that nationalist grievances continued to grow, setting the stage for conflict. By the early 20th century, Irish nationalists were pushing harder for independence, leading to the failed 1916 Easter Rising, a key moment in Irish history when Irish Republicans attempted to overthrow British rule. The aftermath of the uprising, along with the Anglo-Irish War that followed, eventually led to the creation of the Irish Free State in 1921. However, this deal came with a compromise. While most of Ireland gained independence, 6 northern counties, known as Northern Ireland, remained part of the United Kingdom. This partition created deep divisions, leaving a Catholic minority in Northern Ireland feeling marginalised and underrepresented in a Protestant-dominated government. In the 1960s, civil rights movements in Northern Ireland, led by Catholic nationalists, sought to address widespread discrimination in housing, voting rights and employment. The government, largely controlled by the Protestant majority, resisted these demands, leading to mass protests and violent clashes. The British Army was sent in to maintain order, but their presence only escalated tensions. By the late 1960s, the Provisional IRA emerged as the armed wing of the nationalist movement, committed to uniting Ireland by any means necessary. The Troubles officially began in 1969, a conflict that would last for decades. What started as civil unrest soon transformed into a violent struggle between nationalist paramilitaries like the IRA and loyalist groups fighting to remain part of the United Kingdom. The conflict also saw a heavy British military presence, with troops patrolling the streets of Northern Ireland. One of the most infamous moments of the Troubles came on Bloody Sunday in 1972, when British soldiers opened fire on unarmed Catholic protesters in Derry, killing 13 civilians. This incident dramatically increased support for the IRA's armed struggle. As the IRA stepped up its campaign of bombings and shootings, it needed arms and funds. This is where Muammar Gaddafi entered the picture. Gaddafi, who had come to power in Libya in 1969 after overthrowing the pro-Western monarchy, positioned himself as a revolutionary leader and anti-imperialist hero. His regime became a hub for supporting insurgent and revolutionary movements around the world. Gaddafi viewed himself as a champion of the oppressed, not just in Libya, but globally. He supported Palestinian liberation groups, African guerrilla movements, and even radical leftist organizations in Europe. The IRA was another natural ally for Gaddafi's global revolution against Western powers. The first significant links between Gaddafi and the IRA began in the early 1970s, when Libya started funneling money and arms to the Republican movement. Over time, this relationship grew, with Libya providing the IRA with substantial quantities of weapons and explosives. Gaddafi's involvement became crucial for the IRA, especially as the British government ramped up its counter-terrorism efforts. The British Prevention of Terrorism Act and increasing cooperation with international intelligence agencies meant the IRA was finding it harder to source weapons from traditional channels. Gaddafi's support was a game-changer. His regime sent tons of arms, including rifles, machine guns, and most infamously, Semtex, a powerful plastic explosive that gave the IRA a new edge in its bombing campaign. Semtex allowed the IRA to carry out some of its deadliest bombings, including the Birmingham pub bombings in 1974, which killed 21 people, and the Remembrance Day bombing in Enniskillen in 1987, which killed 11 civilians. These attacks horrified the public and made it clear that the IRA's capabilities had reached a dangerous new level, thanks in large part to Gaddafi's support. But Gaddafi's involvement wasn't just about arming the IRA, it was also about ideology. Gaddafi's Green Book, which outlined his political philosophy, rejected both capitalism and communism in favor of what he called Islamic socialism and anti-colonialism. He saw himself as a revolutionary leader standing up against the imperialist powers. And Britain, with its colonial history in Libya, was a prime target. Gaddafi's hatred for Britain was further fueled by the 1986 US airstrikes on Tripoli, launched in retaliation for a Libyan-sponsored bombing of a nightclub in West Berlin. These strikes, which had British support, only deepened Gaddafi's desire for revenge. Britain, meanwhile, wasn't sitting idly by. By the 1980s, the British government, alongside the US, began covertly supporting anti-Gaddafi groups like the National Front for the Salvation of Libya, or NFSL. The NFSL, founded in 1981, aimed to overthrow Gaddafi's regime and was backed by Western intelligence agencies, including MI6 and the CIA. A failed assassination attempt on Gaddafi in 1984, carried out by NFSL forces, further intensified the clandestine conflict between Britain and Libya. There were also allegations in the 1990s that Britain supported the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, or LIFG, which sought to topple Gaddafi. As the 1990s progressed, Gaddafi's influence began to wane. International sanctions imposed due to his regime's sponsorship of terrorism took a heavy toll on Libya's economy. By the time the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998, bringing a tentative peace to Northern Ireland, Gaddafi's role in the IRA's operations had diminished. Seeking to rehabilitate his international image, Gaddafi offered compensation for past terrorist attacks, including the Lockerbie bombing, and began distancing himself from groups like the IRA. Despite these efforts, Gaddafi's regime ultimately fell in 2011 during the Arab Spring. The NATO-backed intervention led to Gaddafi's capture and execution by rebel forces, ending his 4-decade rule. Even after his death, Gaddafi's legacy lived on. Weapons he had supplied to various insurgent groups, including the IRA, resurfaced in other conflicts, fueling violence long after his regime collapsed. Today, Northern Ireland is a far cry from the dark days of the Troubles. The streets are quiet, and the peace process holds. But the shadow of Muammar Gaddafi's involvement lingers. His weapons fueled attacks that cost thousands of lives, leaving families to rebuild in the aftermath. Gaddafi's arms deals didn't just fuel the IRA's violence, they had a lasting impact, reshaping conflicts for decades. His actions remind us of the fragile nature of peace and the far-reaching consequences of global conflict. Historians still debate the full extent of Gaddafi's influence on the IRA's campaign, but it's clear that without his backing, the violence would not have been as sustained or as deadly. Gaddafi's story serves as a lesson in how foreign interference can fuel distant conflicts, leaving a legacy that endures long after the fighting stops. Gaddafi may be gone, but the impact of his support for the IRA will not be forgotten. What do you think? Was Gaddafi's support for the IRA a bold anti-imperialist stand, or reckless interference that prolonged the violence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.